Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a city just teetering on the brink of absolute collapse, a place so consumed by tribal conflict. It really seemed destined for, well, endless violence. Then a single figure arrives. A transformative figure, yes, but not with an army, not with force. Armed instead with a radical idea and, maybe most critically, a piece of paper. Now, this isn't a fairy tale. This document, a written agreement, it actually reshapes everything. It forges a completely new kind of society where, rules and shared identities suddenly trump centuries of blood ties. Today, we're diving deep into that pivotal moment, how the city of Yathrib became Medina, the world's first Islamic state back in 622 CE. Our insights today draw heavily from some great historical accounts, including a piece from History Substack, how Medina became the first Islamic state in 622. So, our mission for this deep dive is to really grasp the revolutionary nature of Medina's formation. How did such a diverse populace get united? And what's the profound, enduring legacy of its foundational principles for statecraft, for diverse societies, even today?
It's fascinating, isn't it? What's often overlooked, I think, is how intensely practical and, well, innovative this solution was for its specific time and place. When you really look at the conditions in 7th century Arabia, um, it wasn't about imposing some single vision by force. Instead, it was an incredibly sophisticated attempt, really, to find a functional way for vastly different groups, Muslims, Jews, various pagan tribes, to not just coexist, but to actively build a shared future. It established a kind of civic identity that profoundly transcended those deep-seated, often warring tribal loyalties, and that, for its time, was, well, it was a truly foundational shift in political thinking.
I agree completely. And to really appreciate just how revolutionary this was, we absolutely need that before picture. Can you describe Yathrib in 622 CE? What made it such the powder keg? Why was it so ripe for this kind of intervention?
Absolutely. So think of Yathrib not as a unified city, but more like a fractured oasis settlement. It's fertile land, quite rare in the region, drew different groups, but they were deeply divided. Our sources really highlight this particularly debilitating problem, a generations-long blood feud between its two main Arab tribes, the Ais and the Khazraj. And this wasn't just, occasional skirmishes. It was a relentless cycle of revenge killings, counter killings. It had utterly exhausted both sides.
Wow.
Yeah, imagine living like that. A city where any small interaction could spark fresh conflict, where there was no neutral authority, no established way to just stop the cycle of violence. They were quite literally tearing themselves apart. And they desperately needed an external, trusted mediator.
It sounds like a city really at its breaking point. And
Yeah.
this desperation, this need for a mediator, that's crucial when we compare it to Mecca, isn't it? Because Prophet Muhammad had spent 13 years there preaching monotheism. So why did his message largely fail to take political root there, forcing him to look elsewhere?
That's a really critical question. Mecca was a very different environment. While Yathrib was decentralized, kind of chaotic, Mecca was dominated by the powerful Quraysh tribe. They controlled the Kaaba, the central pagan shrine.
Right, the economic hub, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That gave them immense religious and economic power from the pilgrimages. Prophet Muhammad's message, one God, directly challenged that whole status quo. It threatened their traditional beliefs, obviously, but maybe more importantly, it directly undermined their business interests tied to the pagan cults and the pilgrimage trade. So after years of preaching, he only had a relatively small group of followers and faced growing persecution. The tribal elite just saw him as a direct threat.
A threat to their power, their way of life.
Precisely. There was just no room for his message to transform society politically in Mecca.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. The narrative takes this dramatic turn. This city, Yathrib, on the verge of collapse, they actually extend an invitation to Prophet Muhammad. So in 622 CE, he makes that momentous journey from Mecca to Yathrib. The event we know as the Hijra, the migration. We hear this term a lot, but can you emphasize just how significant this event was? It's not just a historical footnote, is it?
Oh, far from it. The Hijra isn't merely a change of address, it's a complete paradigm shift.
Yeah.
That year, 632 CE, marks the very beginning of the Islamic calendar.
Right.
That alone tells you its profound importance. It's the moment Islam transitioned from being essentially a persecuted religious movement to becoming the foundation of a new social and political order.
Right.
It was a voluntary act, seeking refuge, yes, but it completely changed the trajectory of the faith. It symbolized a shift from a purely spiritual mission to one that included community building, governance, recognizing that faith needs a social structure to flourish and, frankly, to protect its followers. Without the Hijra, honestly, Islamic civilization might have looked vastly different.
That's a fantastic point about the pivot from solely spiritual to community building. And it's immediately upon his arrival, or very soon after, that we see the cornerstone of this new society emerge, what we now call the Constitution of Medina. This wasn't just some casual understanding, was it? What do our sources, like the early accounts from Ibn Ishaq, tell us about this document itself?
No, indeed, it was anything but casual. What's crucial to understand, and maybe surprising, is that this wasn't an oral promise, easily broken or forgotten, even in a society where oral tradition was strong but could be ambiguous.
Hmm.
Our sources, particularly early biographies like Ibn Ishaq's Sirat Rasul Allah, they confirm it was a written agreement.
Written down.
Yes, we're talking about a formal document, maybe around 50 clauses, explicitly agreed upon by Muslims, Jews, and even some pagan tribes within the city. That in itself was a huge step for stability, having a tangible, binding social contract.
A written social contract in 7th century Arabia that feels quite radical. What were some of these groundbreaking provisions? What really set the Constitution of Medina apart?
Well, the provisions were revolutionary for the Arabian Peninsula at that time.
Absolutely.
First, and maybe foremost, it declared all the signatories as one political community. They used the term ummah.
Ummah.
Yes. And this was incredibly radical because it placed this shared civic identity, this shared responsibility, above those traditional, often divisive tribal loyalties. So instead of just being An or Khazraj or Banu, whatever, they now had this higher unifying identity rooted in living together in Medina under this agreement.
That's huge.
It is. Secondly, and equally remarkable, it allowed each religious group to follow its own faith. It explicitly guaranteed religious autonomy for all. That's a concept of pluralism way ahead of its time. It also guaranteed mutual defense against outside attacks, uniting them against external threats. And critically, it banned internal violence and blood feuds between the signatory tribes.
Finally putting a stop to that cycle.
Exactly. And finally, this was key for making it work. It established Prophet Muhammad as the final judge, the arbiter, in any disagreements among the signatories.
Okay, so it's not just a ceasefire then. It's really an active blueprint for cooperation. If we connect this to the bigger picture, how truly groundbreaking was this in its era compared to other forms of governance around at the time?
Oh, profoundly groundbreaking.
Yeah.
Think about the alternatives then. Usually conquest, forced assimilation, or just perpetual low-level conflict like they had before. This constitution offered a completely different path. It's arguably the earliest written social contract we know of in the region that explicitly included Jews, pagans, and Muslims living side by side under a common set of rules.
Wow.
It created a genuine framework for cooperation, not conflict, and not through a powerful central army or a vast bureaucracy, but through mutual agreement and shared interest. It really predates similar concepts of religious freedom and civic unity by centuries in many parts of the world. It showed that governance could be about consensus and common good, not just imposing power.
The immediate impact on Medina's social order. It must have been nothing short of transformative. Ending generations of revenge killings, collective punishment, blood feuds at such a dramatic shift. What did that actually mean for the daily lives of people there?
It meant profound relief. I mean, a chance for stability that had been completely absent. Imagine the constant fear, the economic disruption, the sheer emotional toll of that perpetual warfare. The Constitution essentially outlawed those cycles of retribution. Now, this didn't happen magically overnight, of course. It needed sustained mediation, enforcement, but the legal framework was finally there. The Constitution explicitly laid out rights for these different groups. Jews were recognized as full political members, Muslims got rights regardless of their old tribal affiliation, and pagan allies who signed on, they were fully included too.
So everyone had buy-in.
Yes, and the expectation was reciprocal, clear. All signatories had to defend Medina if it was attacked. It wasn't a one-way street. It was a truly mutual commitment.
And what's particularly compelling is that specific guarantee of Jewish autonomy. You mentioned it, but that quote, "The Jews of Banu Auf are one community with the believers. The Jews have their religion and the Muslims have theirs." That isn't just tolerance, is it? It feels like more, like a recognition of distinct identities within one political framework.
Exactly. It's much more than just passive tolerance. It's a robust recognition of religious and legal plurality. This meant Jews could run their own legal and religious affairs based on their own laws, their own traditions. No forced assimilation, no forced conversion, while still cooperating on shared political stuff like defense and resolving disputes between groups. It fostered a remarkably inclusive environment for its era. Difference was acknowledged, even protected, rather than suppressed. It's really an early example of multi-confessional governance, setting up separate judicial systems for religious communities, a model that, for better or worse, actually resonated in various forms later in Islamic history.
That is truly groundbreaking. Now, when we talk about inclusivity in this new state, how did it approach the role of women? That's always a critical question. What do our sources, like hadith collections, early legal texts, tell us about their status in Medina, compared to maybe what we expect from that period?
That's an excellent and critical question, definitely. Women's roles often get overlooked in these grand historical narratives.
Mhm.
What our sources, specifically Hadith, early legal texts from this period, reveal is, well, it's a significantly different picture than perhaps many might assume. Women in Medina had substantial legal rights. They owned property, they participated actively in market trade, commerce, managing their own finances.
Actively in the market.
Yes, and they were also consulted in political decisions, which indicates they had a recognized voice in community affairs.
Hmm.
And beyond the domestic sphere, some women even participated directly in the early battles. Umara, at the Battle of Uhud, is a famous example, recorded as defending Prophet Muhammad himself. So this wasn't a society where women were entirely shut out from civic or even military life. Quite the opposite. They had an active and recognized role, maybe not always equal in modern terms, but certainly a recognized one within the community, often far exceeding what was common in many other contemporary societies.
It sounds like a much more participatory society than we might initially imagine, which brings us to a crucial point about what made Medina's state structure so different from contemporary empires. You mentioned it wasn't built on conquest or heavy taxation. Can you elaborate on what made it such a unique model of governance for its time?
Certainly. This is where Medina really stands apart, I think. Unlike those big hierarchical empires, the Byzantines or Sasanians with their huge bureaucracies, standing armies, complex tax systems, Medina was profoundly decentralized. It was consensus-based. There was no professional standing army. Instead, tribes agreed to defend collectively, contributing their own fighters when needed.
So more like a militia system.
Sort of, yes, based on collective agreement. And there were no police forces or tax collectors in that traditional coercive sense. Loyalty wasn't enforced by some omnipresent state machine. It was built through trust, through demonstrated fairness in mediation, through public consultation. Prophet Muhammad's leadership wasn't like a king or an emperor. It was primarily based on mediation, arbitration, leading by example. He cultivated allegiance through moral authority and justice, not just military might. It made it very much a bottom-up kind of governance, rooted in the community's actual buy-in.
That's a powerful distinction, a state built on trust, not coercion. And it's important to clarify, isn't it, that this wasn't inherently expansionist or aggressive right from the start.
Exactly, that's crucial. While war with Mecca eventually did come, and it was a defining struggle, absolutely, it's important to understand it was primarily framed and seen as defensive. Medina started as a safe space, a sanctuary for this diverse population seeking peace and order. It wasn't conceived as a military base for immediate expansion or conquest. The initial revolutionary intent of its formation was internal stability, collective well-being, not imperial ambition. This initial focus on internal cohesion and defense really highlights its unique foundation.
And within this new, relatively peaceful framework, public life must have flourished in ways that were impossible before. For the first time, Muslims could pray openly, build mosques, practice their rituals without fear. Can you tell us about the significance of that, this public expression of faith, how it shaped the community?
Oh, the ability to practice faith openly was incredibly liberating, foundational really, for the nascent Muslim community. No longer hiding their beliefs, they could establish actual physical spaces for worship. The Quba Mosque, built right on the city's edge during the Hijra itself, became the very first mosque in Islamic history. It symbolized this new freedom.
As the first mosque.
Yes. And later, the Prophet's Mosque in the center of Medina became much more than just a place for prayer. It really evolved into this vibrant, multifunctional center. Prayer, yes, but also governance diplomacy. It functioned like a town hall where community decisions were discussed, a court where disputes were resolved, a school for teaching, even a guest house for visitors. It truly became the heart of this new civic community. It illustrates how religion, civic life, governance, they were deeply intertwined there.
That integration is fascinating. But beyond the politics and the places of worship, what about the social innovations? What really set Medina apart? I'm thinking specifically about how it cared for its most vulnerable members. You mentioned something truly revolutionary for tribal Arabia,
Mm.
this concept of a welfare system. How was that implemented? What specific impact did it have?
Yes, this is truly one of the most remarkable social innovations of Medina, something almost unheard of in traditional tribal societies back then. The Prophet established a systematic welfare system. Wealth from zakat, which is a mandatory charity tax collected from the wealthier members of the community, was then systematically distributed to those in need.
So not just random acts of kindness.
No, exactly. It was an institutionalized mechanism for social support. Orphans and widows, who would typically have been incredibly vulnerable, often without support outside their immediate kin, they were actively protected and provided for. Debt relief was also a crucial component, helping struggling families, preventing them from falling into deeper poverty or even servitude.
So this was a truly new idea then, in a society where the poor often had no safety net outside their immediate family or tribe. What was the impact of this?
The impact was profound. It fostered a sense of collective responsibility, a solidarity that went way beyond those traditional family and tribal ties. By establishing a formalized system to care for the poor, the indebted, the widowed, the orphaned, Medina was building a genuinely cohesive and compassionate society. It demonstrated a very practical application of Islamic principles of justice and mercy. It showed the community had a duty to look after all its members, especially the most vulnerable. And this move significantly strengthened the social fabric, the loyalty to this new state. It showed tangible benefits to its citizens, beyond just political stability.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for us today? Medina in 622 CE, it wasn't a kingdom in any traditional sense, was it? No royal bloodline, no fixed national borders, no flag waving over some conquering army. What it did have was a leader trusted across those old tribal lines, a powerful written agreement binding diverse groups together, and a vision that fundamentally replaced endless cycles of revenge with a system built on justice, mutual defense, and this new shared civic identity. It's just a powerful story of transformation through, really, not a conquest.
It's truly a testament, I think, to the power of ideas and cooperation over just brute force. It provided Islam its political foundation, of course, that's undeniable. But more broadly, it showed that a profoundly diverse society, one with deep-seated historical conflicts, could actually live together under a system of rules and a shared civic identity, rather than just relying on those ingrained ties of blood and tribe. And this fundamentally changed how people thought about power, about responsibility, about faith. It demonstrated that unity could be forged through consensus and justice, not merely through the sword. And this, I think, raises an important question for you, our listener, to consider. How do these core principles, civic identity, multi-community cooperation, rule-based governance, first established way back in Medina, how do they continue to resonate or perhaps challenge our modern ideas of state building in diverse societies? What can we learn today from a society that chose consensus over conquest and a document over an army to achieve unity and build something entirely new?